Hello, I'm Siri Agrell, and I'm so excited to welcome you here to the Toronto stage of World City Festival here at the amazing Roy Thomson Hall. We are about to kick off an incredible block of content from our beloved city, and I can think of no better way to do that than with our own Mayor John Tory. So Mayor, welcome, and I was hoping you could welcome our audience to our beautiful city.
Well, I will, and Siri, thank you, and I'm so happy that Toronto is able to be part of this World City conference, because notwithstanding that it's been made more difficult by the pandemic, obviously, people still getting together, exchanging ideas, sharing the misery a little bit has been, I think, fundamental to getting us this far. I'll tell you that during the pandemic, I found it immensely beneficial to sit in on a number of these global virtual conferences because, for example, in Europe, the timetable was running ahead of us so that you could see as they came out of the first stage of the pandemic what they were doing, what their experiences were, and so on. And we were able to immensely benefit from that and just see the ideas that other cities were implementing to try and deal with all of this. And so it was very, very helpful to us, and I'm sure this meeting will be equally helpful. You'd like to think we're on the back end of this pandemic, and I'm not sure we really know. We hope we are. We've come through this with tragedy, yes, but relatively well. And I think what's been interesting for me, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, in the chat that I have with Siri today, is that we have learned a lot and gained a lot and done a lot of things because the crisis was on. I use the expression around the Toronto government that we need to do things at wartime speed, and I'm not sure in my lifetime we'd had any real sort of war going on. We've had crises of different kinds before, but nothing quite like this. But it has proven the capacity of government to do things and to do things fast when it needs to do things fast, which I hope we can carry forward into peacetime. It also has proven to me the immense value and need for partnerships. The government can't do it alone, nor can anybody. The private sector can't, the nonprofit sector can't. And I think it's also put into pretty stark relief some of the challenges that we have, especially with inequity. I think that has been shown not just to be a reality of life in terms of people being underhoused or being underemployed, but also those are the very same people that got sicker in greater numbers faster. And it really just underlines the urgency of trying to do some things. And we got a good start on some of those things, again, during the pandemic, food security measures we'd not undertaken before. New arrangements with respect to housing and moving ahead very quickly on things like modular housing. So, I'm just so glad we're together talking. I'm so glad that you're going to have a chance. I'm obviously very biased, but when you see Cardinal Offishall, when you see, Claudette McGowan, when you see some people from Mars talking about sustainability, I'd like to think you're seeing some of our very best and brightest, and that's our pleasure and privilege to be able to present to you from the Toronto stage. So back to Siri, and we'll get into the meat of the questions.
So it's so nice to see you in real life. I know you've been doing a lot of these virtually. Is this the first one that you've done where you've actually had to wear pants?
Yeah, it's actually funny you say that because I used to kid when I was doing, and I want to talk about this a bit because one of the things that I did the most that I found was actually really important at the end of the day to me, but also to the people that I serve and so on, was appearing on the media a lot to answer questions. Mm-hmm. And, there was so much unknown, there still is so much unknown about this, that, people were, of course, incredibly anxious. I mean, most people in their lifetime of people that are alive today would not have seen a pandemic or anything approaching this, except maybe the Second World War, and I wasn't around for that. But so you found that there was this incredible need for people to have some reassurance from their leaders, some answers to questions, even though they were questions that got asked over and over again. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, I started doing at 6:30 every morning, answering questions on television, questions put in by the viewers. And I regularly would kid because they could never see whether I was actually wearing pants or not. And I will tell you, on some occasions, I was certainly wearing shorts. Yeah. I'll never say I came pantless.
You heard it here first.
I never came pantless, but I was wearing shorts. But it taught me again how crucially important communication is when you're dealing with large numbers of people, in our case, 3 million people that live in this city, and how much just giving them basic information calms them and allows them to plan their day, their week, their family, their job, whatever it is they're trying to plan in the face of immense uncertainty. And so I learned a lot from that. I've learned it before, but you can't learn that lesson often enough.
Yeah, I worked for you for 3 years, and I would say you worked yourself pretty hard even at the best of times. And as you said, this is definitely not the best of times. Maintaining that contact with the public, you've obviously, put so much effort into that. What have your days been like through this? What's it like to be the mayor of a giant and growing city in a pandemic like this?
Well, of course, the first thing people, I don't think they forget, but I think they don't think about the fact we had to keep all the services going, just the day-to-day, some of them were reduced or changed or, whatever, but the services had to keep going. The taps still have to turn on and the toilet has to flush and the transit has to come and the fire department has to be operative and all that. And so, you have all that still going on, which because there's always problems with that on a day-to-day basis in a big city. And then you layer on top of that the need for these extraordinary services, and we made it a priority from the beginning to make sure we focused hard on the most vulnerable people.
Yeah.
We knew there would be more people that would be homeless. There would be more people who would be, maybe food security issues would come to the fore. They were always there, but we didn't see them in such stark relief, as I said earlier.
Yeah.
And on it goes. There'd be seniors who are used to having their kids come and look in on them. And all of a sudden we said to their kids, no, you can't go there because those people are very vulnerable to the virus. And so we had to find a way to get people to look in on those seniors and to make sure they got their food. So it just, and then if you add to all that the incredible importance of collaboration that goes with communication, you spent an immense amount of your time on the phone with other governments, with the nonprofit sector, with the private sector, to sort of make sure you stayed on top of things. And most importantly, I think unlike what might have happened in some other countries we saw, stay on the same page.
Right.
If people see you divided, if they don't see you at all, then they're worried about that. What are they hiding, or why aren't they telling me what I need to know?
Yeah.
I think it's almost worse if you're very visible, but you're visible divided from each other or divided from what the medical experts are saying or this kind of thing. And so we made a big effort to make sure we collaborated and then we stayed on the same page, which we've done very successfully. So my days were filled with that. I was quarantined for 14 days because I came back from sort of a sales mission for Toronto to
right
England.
At the beginning.
And first of all, I'd never gone 9 days, which I did. 9 days I went without seeing another human being, which was bizarre. But it was surprising to me how from, I start sort of at 6 o'clock in the morning and until like literally 8:30 at night, I was busy.
Yeah.
You're just on, you're on the phone, but you're also on, whether it's Zoom or WebEx or whatever.
Yeah.
And there was just so much to do. And so the days were busier than they've ever been, although they weren't busier going anywhere. Like you're staying in your office and you're on this screen in front of you, but you got a lot done because you had to.
Yeah. I think we have seen in Canada a real, sort of team effort to try and stave some of this stuff off, try to get ahead of things. Obviously, we're dealing with health first and foremost, but the economic impact of this has been massive and immediate, right? Everything just shut down. Can you talk to me a little bit? Obviously, Toronto is sort of the economic engine of Canada. What have you been doing with your team and with different layers of government to make sure that our economy keeps going?
Well, as usual in this country that has plenty of government for a relatively small population, we divided things up. And of course, that's all tied up in constitutional jurisdiction and things we don't dare talk about because it would put everybody to sleep. But it became evident early on that the federal government, as the one with the most fiscal capacity, as the one that could do national programs, would take the basic responsibility for things like the emergency benefit that went to individuals who were suddenly dislocated, the wage subsidy program. And those were key, to keeping the economy alive, because I think it wasn't that it was going to make it robust or make it, sort of thriving by any means, but it was going to kind of limit the damage, stop the bleeding or staunch the bleeding.
People could go to the grocery store still. They
and all that sort of thing, and because you had to keep all that going.
Yeah.
I think, so there was a lot of that. I think we all then focused on ways in which we could defer payments to leave cash in businesses because we knew their revenue suddenly stopped. We've all been through recessions before where, your revenue might drop maybe on a bad recession 20 or 25%, but not go to zero overnight. And it's just suddenly your store is closed or your business and there's no revenue. So we all worked on deferring payments, which I think was considerable. And then I think we did some things that, were some of those more innovative things that I think was taking advantage of a crisis and doing things at wartime speed, which included, we for example had a program we did with Shopify and with Google that got like thousands of companies online for the first time. I mean, it's shocking to think there actually were companies leading up to 2020 that weren't yet online, but it was the majority actually that weren't, especially the smaller companies. So we had this program we put together with those partners and the city where we got thousands of companies so far during the pandemic online, not just online with a sort of basic website, but online with an actual e-commerce store. So what that meant was they could continue to deal with their existing customers that they always knew who couldn't come in the store because it was closed, but they also suddenly had access to a global audience of customers. And we literally put this program together, and in fact, the federal government thought so much of it that they expanded it across the country because they thought it was going to help all businesses right around the country. So
I think it just started in Halifax today. They just launched it.
yeah, there are things we did like that were very practical and weren't so much relying on the subsidies that were so much needed, but relying rather on just saying if you can provide some basic support to people to give them a tool they can use to survive and reach their customers, they will do okay. And I'm not saying we didn't pay a huge price for this pandemic. We did, and we still are. But I think there were things like that helped to make the pain a little less intense.
Yeah, and that's such an amazing example, I think, of collaboration, because it was about really local businesses, like Main Street businesses, but it was using the huge amount of tech talent that we have here in Toronto to help them get online. Have you done the same thing with city services? Did you find you had to modernize really quickly within your own government?
God knows I would never want the pandemic to go on, but we got more done in terms of the digitization, which was a challenge that we faced. We've won awards for being a smart city. You helped with that when you were working for the city. But, I used to marvel at the fact we won awards because I didn't think we'd done very much in terms of truly modernizing the way we delivered services. I ran a big company, and we, in many years past, and many of the companies that are resident here in Toronto have gone long past the government in allowing their customers to deal with them digitally and to have, very efficient ways of doing things and getting rid of a lot of the paperwork and red tape. So all of a sudden, lo and behold, things did get done at wartime speed because they just had to.
Yeah.
And so the answer to your question is yes, there was a lot done on that front that I think will help bring Toronto and its government up maybe closer to the level that businesses have been at for some time. And a lot of local, tech firms helped us with that. And a lot of it was about serving people. It was making life better for individual people, not for big business. I mean, we did some of that too, but it was about making life better for people, and those will be lasting effects. And I just hope we can continue with the wartime speed stuff.
Definitely. I think what people have realized is that, we talk about modernization a lot in government, but really it's about service continuity.
Yeah.
Right? It's making sure that people can still access those things. Now, you can do that when it comes to sort of, retail and paying your parking tickets and things like that, but there are, big issues in the cities and other ones that are not going to be solved by technology. Homelessness, the price of housing, large-scale infrastructure projects. Can you talk to me about some of the things you've done sort of in the physical realm to make sure that you're expediting projects, that people can move around, that people have places to live?
Well, we decided early on that one of the problems with, a pandemic like this was to be able to have people still be able to move around, but do it safely.
Yeah.
And we found very early on, because it was spring when the pandemic kind of hit here, and all of a sudden everybody wants to be outside after a long Canadian winter. I shouldn't talk about that because we're trying to sort of market the city here. This winter is actually a fabrication of our competitors, but we have a winter that seems long and all of a sudden everybody wanted to be outside. So we did something that others, there'll be cities part of this conference that will say, well, big deal, we did that before, but we had been perhaps a bit more, slower to move on doing these things. So we suddenly closed down some of our bigger streets. We made quiet streets throughout the city, many kilometers, in order to give people the opportunity to be outside safely, and with good health. And of course, we discovered, no surprise, people would say to me, why were you surprised? I wasn't. People loved it because they loved the freedom, they loved the experience of being able to see the city differently, and so on. We sped up a lot of our infrastructure projects because we had the advantage, I guess if you can call it that, there has to be a silver lining in every cloud, of the city being much quieter, so we could do major infrastructure projects much faster and more disruptively, if that's a word, in a way that people didn't really notice. We put in more bike infrastructure, safe, separated bike infrastructure than any year in the history of the city, because we were doing it because we wanted to provide people with a safe alternative because they were anxious about public transit. But at the same time, these were all things that were in the books for years out, and we got it done, and again, proved that we could do it at wartime speed and do it well. I mean, there was not anything sacrificed in terms of safety or quality. It was done well. So I think, and then there were some things that were like softer but very important to people, like, we used city infrastructure to deliver food. A lot of the food banks were in places that were closed, like a community center.
Yeah.
So what we did is we said, well, we can't leave them closed. So we opened up deliberately libraries just for the purpose not of coming to get a book, but of getting food and of distributing food. We had amazing partnerships I made reference to earlier on with nonprofit organizations where we would sit neighborhood by neighborhood at tables with nonprofit, business, the government, and say, okay, how do we meet the needs of the people that live in this neighborhood, the seniors? We tried to make a special effort on mental health. providing extraordinary services to people so they could literally phone up a number and get help. And it was like a hot transfer, they call it, which is you didn't get a message saying, call us back in 2 days or
Press
we'll call you
9
back.
for-
You could literally be talking to somebody 3
that's
minutes after
amazing.
you called that could counsel you if you needed help. And we focused particularly on some of the communities harder hit, like the racialized communities, the LGBTQ2S communities and so on, with specialized resources for them. So there was just a lot of stuff we did that, again, was a great lesson because it proved it could be done, it could be done quickly, and that it made a big difference, and that it was not that expensive, and some of it was. The homelessness stuff was more expensive because we were forced to take steps to ensure physical distancing, but the rest of them were not really that expensive.
Yeah. And you really just tapped into existing networks of nonprofits. The libraries is amazing, I think, example, because there's 100 branches in Toronto, and they're literally in every neighborhood.
And you know what else was great?
Yeah.
We had to redeploy a lot of workers because a lot of people were not delivering the services they normally would because they were, they just couldn't.
Right.
And we went to them and said, well, look, we are prepared to redeploy you, but you have to agree to be redeployed. And many, many people signed up. The library workers worked in the food banks in the library because the libraries were closed. Many of our workers worked, who would work on solid waste one day, ended up helping us with some issue to do with seniors or with food banks or with long-term care. And we needed hundreds of people to be redeployed to long-term care because so many of the staff in those places themselves got sick. And so we needed people to help. And so it was really a great testament to public service in the broadest sense, and to the fact that, again, if you think outside of the normal, kind of rigid box everything is in, that you can actually do a lot of stuff for a lot of people.
But a huge piece of machinery, too. There's 11,000 employees, I think, of the city of Toronto.
Well, many more than that, actually. When you add everything up, including police officers and firefighters, it's like 35,000.
Amazing.
Transit workers, it's like 13,000 of those. I should say, by the way, another area where we did this was with the arts. I mean, we recognized early on that the artists were going to be among the hardest hit people, just because they make their living performing or having their works on display, and none of that was going on. And so the first thing we did was we took some of the money we would have spent on events and redeployed that to kind of an emergency fund that people could access. But the second thing we did, which was really important, is as we came out of the sort of the peak period of the pandemic, a lot of the events we had out in the city were events we kept safe, so we kept them outside, but they focused on things to do with art, so that we would have projections in 25 different places in the city at night that people could go and see, but they could go and see them because they were on every 10 minutes, and so there was no crowd scene. It was outside, so it fit in with what we had to do, but it also was of help to the artists and promoted the arts. And artists did a lot of things during the pandemic themselves, and I'm sure they did that to keep busy, but it also soothed people.
Yeah.
They needed music, and they needed to see some dance, or they needed to read a good book, because otherwise they'd have been driven crazy by the confinement that people faced in this city, and I'm sure it's true elsewhere.
It's so nice to hear you say that, because I think it's one of the things, just as a resident of the city, that you miss, right? And you worry about, of like, when will I be able to see somebody on this stage dancing or singing? Is that going to come back? How are we going to bring it back? Why do you think that maintaining the sort of cultural energy of the city has been important through that? Is it just as a salve, or?
Well, no, look, it's an important industry, so you don't want all those people to either go completely under or to move away, although I'm not sure where they'd move to at this stage with the worldwide pandemic. But I think as important, that's obviously about individuals and their quality of life and so on. As important as that, I believe the reason we've grown so much as a tech center and become such a magnet for smart people from around the world to come and move and live here is not just our quality of life. It's not just the fact that we collaborate and that we respect each other, and no matter where we come from, color of skin, sexual orientation, we do all of that, and it's part of our way of life that I think is well known. But our reputation for innovation comes, yes, from the fact we have a great tech sector and a great financial services and life science. We have huge critical mass. I mean, we're among the biggest cities in North America, and in some cases in the world, even though Toronto is not one of the biggest cities itself in terms of population, but we're big in all those areas. But it's partly because as well we're known as a city of innovation. And a city that is committed to the arts, to film, to theater. Look at the comedians we produce, the musicians, some of whom are part of this program. That's a city I think people could know is going to be committed to creativity and to allowing people to express themselves and so on. And then there's finally the point we discussed already, which is the mental well-being of the people who live here. They need reasons to make them smile. They need the universal language that music represents. Music will aggravate some people and soothe others, but the bottom line is everybody will listen to it and have an opinion and find it's music. And same with all the other forms of art. So it's hugely important, and that's why we've supported it through the pandemic, and we will afterwards.
One of the big things about drawing people to a city is the vibrancy and the variety of things to do, but it's also about affordability. You know, affordability, I think in a lot of big cities was an issue before the pandemic, but as people's livelihoods is threatened, how much do you think about that? How much do you worry about affordability, especially when it comes to housing and making sure that we can still create spaces for people to be able to afford to live here?
Well, I worry about it more than ever because we had extraordinary programs, we still do during the pandemic because it's still on, to support people in different ways.
Yeah.
But you know, sooner or later those programs will not be in place anymore, and we will still have an affordability problem that may be bigger than ever because maybe the revenue side will have dropped off. In other words, people's incomes may be down for a while. And so we were really underway on that before the pandemic came, with a whole range of housing options, a whole range of things like you know, low fare transit passes and things that took account of the fact that we need to be a city, and we are committed. I can certainly tell you, I as mayor and the council that I head are committed to making sure this can remain a city where everybody can live. Because if you let yourself get fooled into the trap of saying, well, because we're so successful, it's okay that now people who are of modest income can't live here anymore, it's okay. It's not okay. It's not okay socially, and it's not okay economically, because those modest income people are people you need in a healthy economy, and you need them to make sure you have a mix of people. So I think the affordability issue has never gone away. It will be back to being the main focus of our concern in the context certainly of housing and things like transit and food security when we get through the pandemic. But in the meantime, we're being, I guess, kind of held in there a little bit by some of the extraordinary programs that are in place to help people.
You also have expedited some very specific projects around housing. You did a modular housing, I think, initiative.
Again, want to talk about wartime speed,
Yeah.
and you want to talk about the fact that I don't think this would have happened if it weren't for the pandemic. But
Yeah.
I was the one, I'd seen that modular housing, which a lot of people watching this in other cities will say, well, big deal.
Yeah.
We hadn't done it.
Yeah.
Nobody just said, just do it, because you know by definition it can get done quickly.
Yeah.
So we're going to go from concept in June to people living in this modular housing,
Yeah.
people who are in need of supportive housing in November. Never has there been anything like that done. I went down to the plant to see the part of that miracle, which
Yeah.
is the construction of the modular housing units. But these are two pilot projects we're doing, which will be successful. And then we have already on the books to do more, because then I will look at people and say, well, if we got the first one done in 6 months, you know I'll ask them this,
Yeah.
if we got the first one done in 6 months, why can't the next 5 be
Yeah.
done in 6 months? Like, what reason is there, since
Yeah.
we've proven we can do it? And so there's things like that, you know, like the digitization of services, that were things we proved we can do at wartime speed and represented big steps forward for us,
Yeah.
even if other cities don't think so. I mean, this is only, I think, the second city in Canada where this has been done on a scale. And I think then we've got to look at how we can make that an even bigger part of how
Yeah.
we address the affordability and things like mental health and other things where people need supportive housing and they need it quickly.
Yeah, I think it's amazing because you sent me to a conference a few years ago in Paris, and one of the places I visited was a modular housing facility that they had done for the influx of refugees, and they had done the same thing. They had fixed it in 6 months. And I remember we talked about it when we got back. We're like, oh, there's no way we could do that here, and it's incredible that it's getting done. Talk to me though about, you know, there's still, people are nervous, they're worried about their communities and their livelihoods. There's still a degree of, and I don't know if this is a global term, but NIMBYism, right? That people,
Oh, yeah.
there are still people who push back on this, of like, I understand that housing is an issue, but I don't want it in my neighborhood, or I don't want the bike lane on my street. Have you found that this has helped you sort of communicate through that the scale of the problem helps you bring people along?
I think what has happened, interestingly enough, and I'm sure other cities that are watching have been through this, is the problems of homelessness and people with mental health issues and addiction issues and so on those problems have been much more visible. Because the streets were kind of empty of people who would be normally going about their business, going to work or going shopping for long periods of time, and they're still not back to normal, it tended to sort of show the people who were always there but maybe blended more into, you know, to the city scene. And so I don't think it's made it any easier, but what I found with these things is, because I get called out because I'm the mayor of the entire city to pretty well every one of these hotspots where we're going to do something to help people who need support, and where people push back and say, well, yeah, we're really sympathetic to that, but it shouldn't be done here. It should be done kind of over there somewhere. I find when you sit and reason with people, when you make sure you provide adequate support for them in having a stable neighborhood as much as you do for the vulnerable people, people come around after a period of time. People are afraid a bit right now. They're afraid of things that are different. This is certainly different, the whole pandemic. The notion of having people that have special needs in your neighborhood can be different. But I find that what we often have happen after a month or two, putting the right supports in place, sitting with people and talking to them, is they become people who in effect adopt these residences, and suddenly they're in playing games with the residents, or they're going and decorating the place for Christmas or whatever, and that's what we've been trying to make happen. And it's not always easy, but in the end I think most Canadians and Torontonians do the right thing.
You've been doing the same thing, for a number of years now in terms of trying to get other levels of government to really buy into the fact that cities need increasing support. Cities are on the front line of all of these things. You spoke earlier about how helpful it's been to have different levels of government who are all pulling in the same direction. But do you feel like a shoe has dropped a little bit? I know that, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called you, I think, yesterday to say, oh, are you good? What do you need? Are you seeing that recognition from your counterparts?
Yeah, I've never felt, since I've been mayor, certainly in the case of the Government of Canada, that there was any lack of that recognition.
Yeah.
And I think it's a practical thing, which is, 80% of Canadians live in cities. Toronto is by far the biggest city in Canada.
Yeah.
But more important than any of those numbers is that the reality is when you're delivering a food security program, or a program to help homeless people or people with mental health issues, or any of the things we've talked about, it's going to be delivered locally. Mm-hmm. It is going to be delivered by local nonprofit organizations. And who are the best people to actually kind of work as the government partner in that? It's the local government. I wouldn't argue that Toronto is well positioned to run a national defense program. That's the responsibility of the federal government, and they're good at that. But so too are we good at the things that are delivered locally, and most of the stuff you need in troubled times are delivered to people and businesses locally.
Yeah.
And so I think there's been a great recognition of that, and what you hope is that it continues, because in our country, and there'll be people watching who don't understand the Byzantine nature of our Constitution, but cities are operating under an archaic arrangement that was put in place at the birth of our country in 1867, and it's the same rules that still apply, that have us as people that have to sort of ask for permission to do almost anything.
Right.
It's not sensible anymore, but I think during this time, when it was a premium placed on all governments working together, we were given a greater latitude to do things, and I think we've done them very well with the support of those other governments.
Yeah. We're still the places that, create 60% of the wealth but get, 1 cent back of the
all that
tax
stuff.
dollar.
It's just not fair, and it's not modern, and it's not realistic, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
So when the pandemic is over, we'll have to get back to having those discussions, because I think it will have enhanced our chances of having success, because we've done well delivering those things in partnership with other governments, but we're the delivery agent because we're there.
Yeah. I was just going to ask, do you have time to be thinking about those big structural changes that need to be made, or are you so sort of in the weeds of like, okay, we're going to deal with this now, but we're going to talk about the tax structure?
It's mostly still that, because the pandemic has, we just got the first wave to kind of subside, and then the resurgence came. And so I think we've had to still be really focused on fighting this and on helping businesses survive and helping people who are dislocated. So, there's been little time and little appetite to have the discussions about the longer term, but we're accumulating a list of things that have to be talked about, and maybe, saying, well, what lessons did we learn? We've learned lessons about ourselves and being better. How did we learn a lesson about how we can make governments plural function better together in the best interests of those who live here and who invest here and who do business here?
Yeah.
And so I think that will be a discussion to be had when we get this thing over with, which I hope is sooner than later.
Seriously. And I think part of the leadership is maintaining that list, right, of making sure, okay, I know that this is happening over here, but I'm going to keep an eye on the big picture changes that need to be made. You mentioned that some of our numbers are going back up, and our Raptors president, Masai Ujiri, talked recently about the fact that we're dealing with, a health pandemic, but we're also dealing with a pandemic of racism right now. Toronto's not immune to that. I don't know that there are many places in the world that are. Half of our city is born outside. And the numbers do show that people are experiencing this pandemic differently, if they're racialized, if they're in low-income neighborhoods. How have you been thinking about that lens on this? How do you contend with anti-Black racism as part of your attempts to deal with COVID as well?
Well, we'd started before COVID, so that was actually a really good thing, because we had acknowledged up front that there was systemic racism even in a city like Toronto, which I think is lauded around the world for being progressive when it comes to embracing people and kind of making the best of this hugely diverse population we have. And it really has been to our absolute benefit. I mean, immigration has built this city to the powerhouse that it is today.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's included immigrants who were of all different colors and faiths and sexual orientations and whatnot. We embraced them all. But the systemic racism still existed. It existed before, and it existed after all those people came. And so we had actually established the first in North America confronting anti-Black racism unit inside the city government to fight it. And it started with things like compulsory anti-black racism training for every person who worked for the city government. So we were well underway on that before George Floyd and before the pandemic. And look, with tons left to do, because once you get into this, you realize, and I've learned a lot just from, I took the anti-black racism training.
I heard that your whole staff did.
Yeah,
right?
our whole staff took it. I took it. 3 or 4 hours, I think it took, but I learned more things in the 3 or 4 hours just about things I hadn't sort of thought about that way. And so, now we've got the business community very engaged in that in an initiative called Black North, which I think is going to be hugely important because you've got like 100 companies that signed on for this. But I think what helped, look, the George Floyd tragedy focused us a lot, and other things related to that, and the Black Lives Matter movement. But also what helped was the incredible, again, to use that expression, stark relief of the fact of who got sick in the pandemic first.
Yeah.
And it was way disproportionately people who were, black or brown of skin, who were poorer. And of course, that coincidence by itself tells you something, that it is black or brown residents of Toronto who are going to be poorer and who are congregated in underhousing arrangements, underhoused arrangements, which meant that the virus spread because somebody came home with somebody came home with the virus from work, in a work where they're working close quarters with their colleagues. They went into an apartment that's made for 2 people and there's 6 living there. It is a multi-generational setting. It was a prescription for a spread of the virus, and we saw that's exactly what happened. So I think it just has really heightened our sense of urgency about housing and affordable housing and stuff we were working on before, that we've got to get at it faster and do more. And that we've really got to address these issues. I mean, again, what it underlines for you is the fact that there has been, not all of it is occasioned by racism. There is still a gross inequality of opportunity, even in a city of opportunity like this, that's one of the fastest growing cities in the world. There's inequality of opportunity. And it's sometimes just the fact that somebody lives far enough away, they're underserved by transit, that what's been going on with a tech boom, which is real, in the sort of downtown part of the city, is as far away as the moon for them.
Right.
They have no connection to it. So we've got to forge those connections, reach out and give people those opportunities, and that's, I think, a big lesson that we've seen, really put in front of us. We knew it was there, but I think now it's focused us on that.
I think that there's a need for creating these opportunities and leveling the playing field. But one of the other things that's happening around the world is there's also this growing polarization, right? And sort of radicalization of people who feel that, introducing opportunities for some is taking away opportunities for them. Do you worry about that? Is that something that's in the back of your head?
Well, I worry about it, and I worry about it. I mean, I will say, and I'm not afraid to say this because I said it the day after, the debate that I saw between the 2 presidential candidates was one of the worst things I've ever seen as someone who passionately believes in the political process and the good that it can do, who believes that yes, you can have a disagreement, but you can debate it in a civilized manner. And I think I've done probably literally more political debates on television than anybody else in Canada, because I ran for this job 3 times, twice successfully, once not. And you do, as you literally do 90 or 100 debates. Yeah. And so but I tried, I think, without exception, to be civilized in all of them, because why do you want to behave otherwise? But so this polarization.
You swore a little bit afterwards, I think.
But what's that? Well, sometimes. But I think the polarization you refer to, there is a risk of that. Yeah. But I think if you try and present it the other way and say, no, what we're guaranteeing here is more opportunity overall. I mean, we have 100,000 people coming to this city every year, most of them immigrants. And I think people here have recognized the fact that the reason we're so successful today is because those people, including some of the smartest people in the world, came here, that we're doing so well. And I think they know it is not true that somebody else's success, who may have come from somewhere else or who has some other color of skin or faith, is going to be at your expense. It's not true. You do better overall if you take the advantage of all the talent you have and you embrace everybody and benefit from their differences. And so I think that you have to work at that, but it starts with not being divisive at the top, government not fighting with business, business not fighting with the unions. I'm so proud of the fact that when we go on missions to promote the film industry around the world, and I should tell anybody out there that's in a film center, we're coming after your business, but having said that, we take the unions with us. Yeah. And oftentimes we showed up one time in India and they're going, well, how did these people come to Britain? And you say, well, these are our partners. Yeah. These are our partners. They are the skilled people that are behind the camera and in front of the camera, and so on. So if people are not fighting with each other, but it's all for one and one for all, then you're going to do better. So I work hard to try and prevent that sort of thing from becoming a part of life here, that kind of divisive, polarized. And I think most Canadian politicians and business and other kinds of leaders have tried to do that because they realized it doesn't work. It certainly doesn't work in this country. This country was founded, as you know, on peace, order, and good government. Like, there was no revolution here. We just had peace, order, and good government was our thing. And we've kind of lived up to that, I think, pretty well. And so that doesn't lend itself to a lot of huge kind of polarization and division.
But I think you're making it sound easy, but I think that, you know, cities are a model of how you can make it work, but it's really complicated, right? It's about bringing everybody together at the same time.
Yes.
And I think that I've watched you do that even on issues of transportation, right? Where it's not about cyclists or drivers, it's about we have to make our roads work for everyone. How much of it comes back to that? You know, you talked about communication at the beginning. How much of holding everyone together and fighting through that polarization, how much of it is about telling that story?
Tons.
Yeah.
Tons. If you say to people on something like bike lanes and wider sidewalks and cars, okay, we have this much public space between the front of one store and the front of the other store across the street. We have a certain amount of public space. It's how many ever meters it is. And over time, isn't it reasonable to expect there's going to be some change in how you use that public space? Because the fact is, in our city, we can't really create any more because the stores are there and they're old buildings. We want to save their heritage buildings and all that.
Yeah.
So you have to decide. And I think most people, when you present the facts to them and say, okay, well, we have this many people cycling and this many pedestrians and this many cars and this much public transit, most are willing to listen. There's the odd person that isn't, but that's true of everything. And so I think it is a lot about how you communicate, and you communicate facts and evidence, and you take the time to persuade them. I'm criticized, as you know, for being an incrementalist, but I'm an incrementalist because I think you can get a lot more done in the end than if you try and jam things on people and just say, well, guess what, we're jamming this on you, too bad about your opinion or your concern, because a lot of the time you can explain to people why it is necessary to do what you're doing, and they will actually come on board, even if it's a bit reluctantly.
Yeah. You're not pushing
as
them
opposed
away.
to jamming them on jamming. And then people criticize me and say I'm not doing stuff fast enough. Well, there are things that require great speed, and there are other things where you're better off in terms of the overall achievement over a 5 or 10 year period to just take it in a measured way and make sure you bring people with you.
Or else a pendulum can kind of swing wildly from one
it's
end
true.
to the other.
We've seen it.
Yeah. You've referenced mental health a few times in this conversation. I know it's something that's really important to you. You know, when I worked for you, you hosted a series of conversations with the mayors about mental health. Are you worried about this as an ongoing issue for cities as we go sort of further into this pandemic?
Hugely.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. I took it to the Big City Mayors Caucus in Canada, and I was raising it, and sort of no one had ever really talked about it before. And I raised it, and I said, is anybody else interested in this? And they all said, oh my God, we're so glad you talked about that, because they've seen, as I do, and this is another thing you see when you're local, around every corner, policing, healthcare, unemployment, family breakup, addiction, is a mental health issue. And we've left these unresolved. We did a wonderful thing probably 30 years ago, and we closed down a lot of those big institutions where we used to kind of, what they'd say was warehouse people with mental health issues. And we said we'd replace it with a magnificent series of community supports, and people could live in a community setting and get all the support they needed. We didn't do that. When I say we didn't, the healthcare system didn't. And it is scandalous today. And I'm sure it's true in other cities, not just in Canada, that a lot of those people are left to fend for themselves, and they can't. And then people start saying, well, these people are being very disruptive, and they're doing things, they're taking drugs on the street. And you're saying, well, wait a minute. There are people that have a fundamental health problem. Those who have an addiction issue are people that have a health problem, no different than if you have a lung issue. And we fix lung issues quickly, and we fix heart issues quickly. And yet we sort of assume that somehow people will pull themselves together who have an issue with mental health or with drugs. So I think it's scandalous, and it puts in peril, I think, a lot of the success of cities across the world, that you don't deal with those people who are among the most vulnerable.
Yeah.
I've talked to them, and they will tell you how their life started to run downhill when they started to suffer from depression or developed a problem with alcohol, and they need help. They need help, and the system is not giving it to them. So I sort of am an advocate on this all the time, because I think we have to do much more than we're doing. And again, it will be massively to our benefit morally, but also from a financial standpoint, because those people are coming to the emergency room every day.
Right.
The police are being called because they get into, some kind of trouble on the street every day. I mean, the toll that's being taken is incalculable to the families as well and all that. These are human beings. And yet we won't make the investment to say we're going to attack it at that end and have a better life for those people and save a lot of money on the back end of all the different things we're doing.
It'll take the pressure off the system.
Yeah.
The city has made you less of a conservative, a fiscal conservative.
No, it's not. No, that's not true. But you know what? You are confronted by the reality that you're here to help people, especially locally.
Yeah.
Like I don't have any big international issues or the value of our dollar. I worry about those things as any Canadian would or any person in any country, but I have to worry about the people I see on the street every day. I see them and they see me. You know, so there's no getting away from it, and I don't try because I benefit oftentimes from going out, and as I said, I've been to the shelters and spent a lot of the time there saying, tell me your story, how did you end up here? Because they all ended up here having started, you know, they weren't born to be in a shelter. And so you learn from that, and look, people will say, well, if you care so much about this, why haven't you done more? I do what I can, and I do what the government can, and I do what we all can do. But I'm very committed to it, and I don't think that's about being conservative or liberal. It's just about being a human being and a leader.
Yeah. You've probably spent more time than anyone in the city still out and about and, you know, checking in with everyone and seeing what's going on. Obviously, there are things to be worried about, but there's also still so much vibrancy here in Toronto. What, you know, when we have this audience watching from all over the world, what are the things that you want them to know about Toronto, to be excited about? You know, what is there coming up in this amazing sort of block of, you know, content that we have that you think people should really pay attention to?
Well, I just say to them that no matter who you are, and no matter where you come from, no matter who you pray to, if anybody, no matter what your sexual orientation, no matter what the color of your skin, you will be embraced here, and you will. I mean, people will struggle when they first get here, because when people have the bravery to move somewhere else and uproot their life, there's huge opportunity here, but it starts with being embraced. And the creative capacity of the city, the innovative capacity, the capacity to love the arts, to love each other, and the incredible mix of people you've brought together produces something very special. It's not perfect. I've been talking about the lack of perfection all the way through, but I'm just saying people can come here and they can find opportunity here. This is a city in a country of opportunity that is committed to embracing and getting the best out of everybody. And you know, if I could talk about anything, it would be about that, because that is more important, frankly, than the size of our tech cluster, which is big, the size of our financial services cluster, which is big. I mean, these are global in scale and all of that. But what's really important is that we're a humane, you know, place that tries to preserve a quality of life for people that I think is second in the world. And there's lots of things to see if you want to just come and visit too, that's okay. But because you see, I'm convinced if you come to visit that you'll decide, gosh, I think I'd like to live there. And as I said earlier, this winter business is a complete fabrication of our competitors.
We have a lot of people watching who work in cities every day, who have made it their lives to sort of try and improve their cities around the world. You know, to sort of wrap up, what message do you want to send to those people about what their work means, what cities mean, and what they can do to sort of help us all pull through this?
You know, I have great respect for rural communities and for the rural way of life. In the time I've been in politics, I've had to learn about that as well, when I was not in city politics. But the creative capacity, the capacity to do good, to improve the way of life, for the quality of life for people, represented by large gatherings of people, yes, it poses complications. I mean, I still marvel at how we deliver safe, clean water to people every day through an amazing network of pipes and plants that do all that. You know, but the ability of cities to be creative and to harness people's, you know, kind of energy, whether it's in favor of the arts or in favor of business or in favor of just improving the human condition, is incredible. But you have to sort of make sure you are prepared to deal with the challenges that come with that too, which is that sort of incremental process of addressing problems that come up from huge gatherings of people, clever, creative people, all together. It's complicated. But I believe so passionately in the city way of life, and that's not at the expense of people who live. The peace of the country and the peace of nature, which we have lots of here as well, is amazing. But the excitement and the dynamism of a city, the acceptance of anybody, finding people like you, finding somebody who would believe in your dream because they live next door to you. So I just think we've got to find ways to harness that and connect people together. It isn't just about me putting out some message saying we'll embrace everybody, everybody should embrace each other. It's about building the transit so people can connect up to each other, making sure people can live in affordable communities spread throughout the city, not concentrated in, you know, pockets, making sure that people can work close to where they live so they can walk to work and be able to address climate change by doing that. And I just am a huge believer in the capacity of cities to do great things, and I think that's why people are attracted to them. It's exciting. It's dynamic. It's full of problems, you know, but it's exciting.
Yeah.
And I think Toronto's a very exciting place. And, you know, I've grown up my whole life here. This used to be like boring city. It was. No offense to Buffalo,
what year was
but
that?
when I was, yeah, don't talk about that. But when I was a kid, you would literally go to Buffalo, which is an American city for those who don't know Buffalo, which was maybe 5 times the size of Toronto back then.
Yeah.
and you'd go there for excitement. And now people from Buffalo come here, because this place is so alive thanks to the immigration and thanks to the creativity and thanks to the arts and thanks to, just the Canadian, what I describe as the Canadian way of life.
Yeah.
And so, we got to keep it going. That's the challenge. It's not where we rank on the list of quality of life for cities now, where we rank very high every time in the top 10, in the whole world, top 10. It's where we rank in 10 years.
Yeah.
And those are based on decisions you're making today.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for those decisions, including the one that allows us to have alcohol delivered to our homes now. Thank you for that. That was a very
It wasn't my decision.
Very
but
important
I
intervention.
said to the government that did decide that you could have alcohol delivered to your home. You can go to a restaurant and buy a bottle of wine and take it home. And none of that stuff was allowed with these archaic laws we had before. But I've said they got to leave that in place. You can't take once you've given something, you can't take it away.
You'll pry that from my cold, dead hands.
That's exactly right. Exactly.
Well, I want to thank you for dealing with all these
Thank you, Siri.
challenges. I know there's a lot. I'm glad that everybody got a chance to hear from you today, and I'm excited for the rest of what we have to offer on the
And I will say
stage.
to the World Conference that we want you to come and visit. We want you to come and invest. We want you to come and live here because it is a very special place to live. And I know most of the people watching live in a place they consider special, but come and try us out. And you'll find we've got amazing things going on here, and we'd just love to have more people from all over the world. That's enriched us incredibly so far and will going forward.
Maintaining health and safety protocols, of course.
All rules will be respected.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.